I'm trying to get Prince to Graham.
Get those mixes again, and fix them up the way you always saw them.
Catalog. What's your favorite song? Turns you on every time you do it?
That's a good question. When I was 16, I was completely broke. And my own personal dawn, it is, yes.
Yes.
Because, you know, not being under contract, there's no rush to do it. You know, it's rock and roll. No.
In the music industry, ownership is everything. Record labels own the masters. Executives control the image. Contracts decide what gets released and what never sees the light of day. For decades, this was simply the way the business worked. Artists created. Someone else profited. Someone else decided. Someone else owned it. But one artist refused to accept that. He fought record labels. He fought executives. He fought radio stations. He fought the very system that had made him famous.
That's cool.
And when words were no longer enough, he gave up his own name. To the world, he was Prince, a musical genius, a cultural icon, a mystery wrapped in purple. A man who could command a stadium with a guitar in his hands, then disappear completely from public view. Millions knew his music. Almost nobody knew him. Because behind the fame, behind the image, behind the legend, was a lifelong battle for something most people never think about. Freedom. Freedom over his art. Freedom over his identity. Freedom over his life.
You would look different when it was finished. It takes a long time. There's a lot of music done.
And for decades, Prince fought harder than anyone to keep it. The remarkable thing is, he won. He beat the industry. He changed the rules. He became one of the most powerful and independent artists in music history.
No.
See, I'm always shocked when I hear from you.
But every victory comes with a price. And after spending a lifetime refusing to be controlled by anyone, one question still remains. What did it cost him?
My own personal dawn, it is, yes. It's the time period where you figure out where you're going.
This is a story of Prince, the man who refused to be owned. To understand why freedom mattered so much to Prince, we have to go back to the beginning, long before fame, long before the symbol, long before the world knew his name.
Chronicled in deep dispute with my record label.
Which is Warner Brothers, right?
Yeah.
Back to a quiet boy in Minneapolis, building a world entirely of his own. Before he became Prince, before the stadiums, before the purple suits, the screaming crowds, and the mythology, he was simply Prince Rogers Nelson, a quiet kid growing up in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
I'm trying to get Prince to Graham.
A city better known for freezing winters and musical revolutions. Nobody looking at that shy young boy could have predicted what he would become. But then again, nobody understood what was already happening inside him.
You've completely judged where you've come from and laid out all the pieces, and you know exactly what it all means at that point.
Prince was born on June 7th, 1958, into a household where music was everywhere. His father was a jazz musician. His mother was a singer. Creativity filled the rooms around him long before he understood its power.
Well, there's a few things I wanted to get out of my system, mainly.
Yet, despite the music, home wasn't always peaceful. His parents' relationship was turbulent. Arguments became common. Tension became normal. And eventually, the marriage collapsed. For many children, divorce creates confusion. For Prince, it created something else. A deep need for control.
Your favorite title in the Prince catalog, what's your favorite song? Turns you on every time you do it?
I usually answer by saying the next one.
Because when the adults around him seemed unable to hold their world together, Prince began building one of his own. Music became the place where everything made sense. Notes followed rules. Instruments responded when you touched them. Melodies could be controlled. Life could not. And so, while other children spent afternoons outside, Prince disappeared into sound. Alone in bedrooms. Alone in basements. Alone with records, instruments, and imagination.
And there was a little acting going on too.
There was another challenge too. As a child, Prince suffered from epilepsy. The condition left him feeling different from other kids. Vulnerable, fragile, at times invisible. Yet instead of breaking his confidence, it seemed to fuel something inside him, a determination to prove that limitations didn't define him.
We did a couple other projects. I was working with Shaka Khan. I did an album with her.
If anything, Prince became obsessed with proving people wrong. By his teenage years, his dedication to music had become extraordinary. He wasn't simply learning instruments. He was mastering them. Piano, guitar, drums, bass, keyboards, anything he could get his hands on.
When I was 16, I was completely broke and needed to go get a job, so I got the Yellow Pages out and I couldn't find one thing that I wanted to do.
Most musicians spend years becoming excellent at one instrument. Prince attacked them all, relentlessly, obsessively, as if he were preparing for something only he could see. Friends would later describe his work ethic as almost unbelievable. While other teenagers were sleeping, Prince was practicing. While others were socializing, Prince was recording. While others dreamed about success, Prince was already building it, alone. And perhaps that's a key to understanding him.
I go hug the bass player, he's a man, and I go kiss the keyboard player, she's a woman. You know, we had some of that going on too, but, you know.
Even before fame, even before fortune, Prince trusted himself more than anyone else. He learned early that depending on others often led to disappointment. But music never disappointed him. Music listened. Music obeyed. Music gave him a world where he controlled every detail. And in that world, Prince wasn't invisible. He was powerful. He just hadn't shown the rest of the world yet. Because somewhere inside that basement, surrounded by instruments and ambition, a future superstar was preparing for his first battle. Not against another musician, not against fame, but against an industry that believed it could own him.
The best thing you can do is go back and get those mixes again, and fix them up the way you always saw them completed. And
by the late 1970s, Prince had something most aspiring musicians only dream about. Talent, real talent, the kind that couldn't be ignored.
We looked at each other and then she says, "Are you rearranging the music right now in your head?" And then she said, "So am I."
Songwriting, production, arrangement, performance. He wasn't merely good at music. He seemed to understand it instinctively, as if every instrument spoke a language only he could hear. And eventually, the music industry noticed. Record executives were stunned by what they were hearing. Here was a teenager writing songs, producing tracks, and playing multiple instruments at a level normally reserved for seasoned professionals. It was extraordinary, rare, potentially revolutionary.
No, sir. I mean, I was made to go to church when I was young, and the most thing I got out of that was the experience of the choir.
There was just one problem. The music business already had an idea of what artists were supposed to be, especially young black artists. The industry preferred categories, labels, predictability. They wanted artists that could fit neatly into marketing plans and radio formats. Prince didn't fit any of them. He wasn't strictly R&B. He wasn't strictly rock. He wasn't strictly funk. He wasn't strictly pop. He was all of them, and none of them, at the same time.
So it's really hard to watch other musicians because you tend to, it's like a painting you want to make straighter.
For record executives, that was confusing. For Prince, it was intentional. Because even at 19 years old, he already understood something many artists spend their entire careers learning. The moment someone defines you, they begin controlling you.
What will happen to you if you do something bad. And I don't think God is, to be feared that way.
In 1977, Warner Brothers Records signed Prince to a recording contract. It should have been a dream come true. The opportunity every young musician hopes for. But Prince entered negotiations with demands that bordered on unbelievable. He wanted creative control, complete creative control. He wanted to write his own songs, produce his own records, arrange his own music, play his own instruments. make his own decisions.
Whatever, you just hear it, music like you hear it. Doesn't mean that, what they're doing isn't of merit. It's just, I just hear music different, that's all.
For an unknown teenager, this was almost unheard of. Labels simply didn't operate that way, especially not with young artists. Yet somehow, Prince got what he wanted. Warner Brothers took the gamble. They believe his talent was too extraordinary to lose. And for a while, both sides benefited. Prince released music at an astonishing pace, album after album, song after song, reinventing himself constantly, refusing to stand still, refusing to become predictable.
It was pretty heavy at the time, and I learned more than the birds and the bees, I think.
But beneath the success, tension was already growing. Because Prince wasn't interested in compromise. He didn't want executives deciding what songs should become singles. He didn't want marketing teams shaping his image. He didn't want anyone standing between himself and his audience. Every suggestion felt like interference. Every restriction felt like a threat. Every compromise felt like surrender. And the more successful he became, the more determined he was to protect his independence. It wasn't arrogance, at least not entirely. A fear that had followed him since childhood. The fear of losing control. The fear of being trapped. The fear of becoming someone else's product. Prince had spent years building his own world. Now the machine wanted access to it. But what the industry didn't understand was that Prince had no intention of giving away the keys. Because while Warner Brothers believed they had signed an artist, Prince believed he had found a way to beat the system from the inside. He just didn't realize yet that the biggest battles were still ahead of him. By 1984, Prince wasn't just successful, he was unstoppable. The kid who had once hidden away in Minneapolis bedrooms and basements was now standing at the center of popular culture. The world belonged to him. And for a moment, it seemed like everything he had ever worked for was finally within reach. Then came Purple Rain. Not just an album, not just a movie, a cultural explosion, a phenomenon, the kind of success artists spend entire careers chasing and almost never find. The soundtrack dominated the charts. The film became a box office success. Concerts sold out. Awards followed. Critics praised him. Fans worshipped him. Prince had become something bigger than a musician. He had become an icon. And perhaps that was a problem, because icons don't belong to themselves. They belong to everyone else. Suddenly, the world wanted access to every part of him. Interviews, appearances, photos, stories, explanations. The public wanted Prince. But Prince had spent his entire life protecting parts of himself from the public. The more famous he became, the less freedom he seemed to have. Every movement became news. Every relationship became speculation. Every silence became a headline. And while audiences saw glamour, Prince saw something else. Expectations, demands, ownership, because success creates its own prison. Once you've built something extraordinary, everyone expects you to keep building it. Bigger, better, more profitable, more accessible, more predictable. But Prince hated predictability. He hated repetition. He hated becoming trapped by his own success, which is why, at the very moment most artists would have enjoyed their victory, Prince did the opposite. He pulled away. He became more private, more mysterious, more difficult to understand. Some saw arrogance, others saw eccentricity, but beneath it all was something much simpler: self-preservation. Prince understood that fame was asking him to become a version of himself that other people preferred, a brand, a product, a character, and he refused. So while the world celebrated Purple Rain, Prince was already looking for the exit, already planning the next reinvention, already searching for a way to stay ahead of the machine that had helped make him famous. Because for Prince, success was never the destination. Freedom was. And the more successful he became, the more he began to realize something deeply uncomfortable. Fame and freedom might be opposites. The world believed Prince had everything: money, power, influence, adoration. But behind the purple lights and sold-out arenas, a different battle was beginning. A battle not against critics or competitors, but against ownership itself. And soon, Prince would declare war on the very industry that had made him a superstar. By the early 1990s, Prince had achieved what few artists in history ever would. He had sold millions of records, filled arenas around the world, built an empire from talent, discipline, and relentless creativity. Yet despite all his success, he was becoming increasingly frustrated, because the more music he created, the more he realized he didn't truly own it. On paper, Prince was one of the biggest stars on earth, but behind the scenes, the contracts told a different story. Like most artists of his era, ownership of much of his music belonged to the record company. Warner Brothers controlled the release schedule. Warner Brothers controlled distribution. Warner Brothers controlled access to the music he spent his life creating. And for Prince, that was becoming unbearable, because Prince wasn't running out of ideas. Quite the opposite. He was creating faster than the industry could process. Songs, albums, entire projects, sitting unreleased, locked away, waiting for permission. Permission Prince believed he shouldn't need. The relationship between artist and label was beginning to collapse. Executives wanted strategy. Prince wanted freedom. Executives wanted fewer releases. Prince wanted more. Executives saw products. Prince saw art. And eventually, compromise became impossible. Then came the moment that shocked the world. In 1993, Prince appeared in public with a single word written across his face. Slave, 4 letters, 1 message. And suddenly, the conflict was impossible to ignore. To many people, it seemed outrageous, dramatic, self-indulgent. Critics mocked him. Television hosts laughed at him. Newspapers ridiculed him. How could one of the richest musicians in the world compare himself to a slave? But Prince wasn't talking about wealth. He was talking about ownership, about contracts, about creative control, about an industry where artists generated billions of dollars while often surrendering the rights to their own work. And from Prince's perspective, that system was fundamentally broken. Yet even then, the world still wasn't listening. So Prince escalated the fight. In one of the most famous acts of rebellion in music history, he abandoned his own name, the name Prince, the name recognized around the world, the name worth millions. Gone. In its place appeared an unpronounceable symbol, part male, part female, entirely Prince. The media didn't know what to call him. Fans were confused. Journalists mocked the decision relentlessly. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others called it a breakdown. Few understood what was really happening. Prince wasn't changing his identity. He was weaponizing it. If Warner Brothers owned Prince, then he would become something they couldn't own, something they couldn't market, something they couldn't control. It was legal rebellion disguised as performance art. And perhaps the most remarkable part is that history eventually proved him right. Years later, artists across every genre will begin demanding ownership of their masters, fighting for creative control, challenging contracts, asking the very same questions Prince had been asking decades earlier. Questions about power, questions about rights, questions about freedom. But at the time, Prince stood largely alone, misunderstood, ridiculed, viewed by many as difficult rather than visionary. Yet he refused to back down, because for Prince, this was never really about money. It was about something much deeper. Identity, autonomy, the right to own what he created, the right to decide who he was. And as the battle with Warner Brothers intensified, Prince was preparing to do something extraordinary. If the industry wouldn't give him freedom, he would build a kingdom of his own. Most artists spend their careers adapting to the music industry. Prince decided to build his own. By the mid-1990s, after years of fighting executives, contracts, and corporate gatekeepers, he had reached a conclusion. Freedom couldn't be negotiated. It had to be created. So Prince began constructing something unlike anything the music business had ever seen. Not just a recording studio, not just a headquarters, an entire world. Paisley Park. Hidden in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Paisley Park became far more than a building. It became Prince's kingdom, a place where the rules belonged to him, where creativity never stopped, where music could be recorded at 3 a.m. if inspiration struck, where artists, musicians, dancers, and dreamers could gather under one roof, and perhaps most importantly, where nobody could tell Prince what to create. Walking through Paisley Park was like entering another dimension. Studios, sound stages, rehearsal spaces, private rooms hidden behind unmarked doors, music playing at all hours, ideas constantly taking shape. Prince wasn't simply running a studio. He was building an ecosystem, one entirely independent of the traditional music industry. And he worked relentlessly, sometimes recording through the night, sleeping only a few hours, then returning to create again. Song after song, album after album, performance after performance. His productivity became almost mythical. Those around him often struggled to keep up. But for Prince, creativity wasn't work. It was oxygen. The freedom to create without permission had become his greatest victory. Yet with freedom came something unexpected: distance. As the years passed, Prince became increasingly private. Interviews became rare. Public appearances became selective. Access became limited. The mystery surrounding him only grew stronger. To fans, it made him fascinating. To critics, it made him difficult to understand. To those closest to him, it sometimes made him difficult to reach. Then another transformation began. In the early 2000s, Prince became a Jehovah's Witness. For some fans, the change seemed surprising. For Prince, it felt deeply personal. After spending decades fighting for control of his music, he now sought direction for something else. His soul, faith, became an increasingly important part of his life, guiding his decisions, influencing his relationships, reshaping the way he viewed the world. Yet even as Prince evolved spiritually, his obsession with creation never faded. Behind the walls of Paisley Park sat perhaps the greatest symbol of his ambition: the Vault, a legendary archive containing thousands of unreleased recordings, entire albums, unfinished songs, alternate versions, musical experiments, decades of creativity hidden from public view. Some estimated there were enough recordings to release new Prince music for generations. Others believed the number was even larger. Nobody knew for certain, because like so much of Prince's life, the Vault remained wrapped in mystery. It represented something beautiful: unlimited creativity, infinite possibility. But it also revealed something else. Prince never stopped creating, never stopped searching, never stopped pushing forward. Even after winning the battles that once consumed him, the industry no longer controlled him. The labels no longer dictated his future. He had achieved the freedom he spent his life chasing. Yet somewhere behind the walls of Paisley Park, surrounded by music, mystery, and complete independence, another question was beginning to emerge. What happens when nobody can tell you no? What happens when the kingdom becomes isolated from the rest of the world? And what happens when even a king begins carrying burdens nobody else can see? Because despite all his victories, Prince's final chapter was already beginning, and it would leave the world asking one last question. Did freedom ultimately come at a cost? For most of his life, Prince fought against control. He fought record labels. He fought executives. He fought expectations. He fought anyone who tried to tell him who he should be. And against all odds, he won. By the 2010s, Prince had accomplished something almost unheard of in the music industry. He owned his future. His career operated on his terms. His music remained under his control. His kingdom stood exactly where he built it. Paisley Park, a monument to independence, a monument to freedom, a monument to Prince himself. Yet freedom can be deceptive, because while Prince had spent decades protecting himself from outside forces, there were battles happening inside his own body that control alone could not solve. Years of relentless performing had taken a toll. The energetic stage shows, the acrobatic movements, the endless rehearsals, the constant demand for perfection, they came with consequences. Behind the scenes, Prince was reportedly dealing with chronic pain, the kind of pain many performers quietly learn to live with, the kind audiences never see, because legends aren't supposed to suffer. At least not publicly. Then, in April 2016, concerns began to grow. Prince's private jet made an emergency landing after he reportedly experienced a medical issue. Representatives reassured fans. Publicly, everything seemed under control, but questions remained. And only days later, the unimaginable happened. On April 21st, 2016, Prince was found unresponsive inside Paisley Park. He was 57 years old. The news spread across the world within minutes. Fans gathered outside the gates. Radio stations changed their programming. Landmarks lit up in purple. Millions struggled to believe it. Prince seemed eternal, larger than life, untouchable. Yet suddenly, he was gone. In the weeks that followed, investigators searched for answers. Eventually, authorities concluded that Prince had died from an accidental fentanyl overdose, a powerful synthetic opioid, one far more dangerous than many people realized at the time. The revelation shocked the public. It didn't fit the image many held of Prince, the disciplined artist, the fiercely private genius, the man who controlled everything. But tragedy rarely follows the stories we expect. And perhaps that's what makes Prince's death so difficult to process. Because after spending a lifetime mastering every aspect of his career, after winning battles against corporations worth billions, after creating one of the most independent careers in music history, his final struggle was painfully human. Vulnerability, pain, mortality, the very things no amount of talent, wealth, or control can completely overcome. In the days after his death, another mystery captured public imagination. The vault. Thousands upon thousands of unreleased recordings hidden inside Paisley Park. Music the world had never heard. Stories left untold. Ideas unfinished. Entire chapters of creativity locked behind a steel door. It was almost poetic. Even in death, Prince remained mysterious. Still creating questions. Still revealing layers nobody fully understood. And perhaps that because Prince spent his entire life protecting something sacred. A private world few people were ever allowed to enter. A world built from music, imagination, discipline, and absolute independence. Yet standing outside Paisley Park after his death, many people found themselves asking the same question. Prince had finally achieved the freedom he spent a lifetime pursuing. But did winning leave him alone? Or was solitude simply the price he was always willing to pay? Because Prince's story wasn't really ending. In many ways, it was only beginning. The music remained. The influence remained. The blueprint remained. And long after the man was gone, the world would discover just how much he had changed it forever. History remembers Prince as a musician, a performer, a songwriter, a superstar. But perhaps his greatest achievement had nothing to do with music at all. Because long before artists were openly discussing ownership, long before musicians challenged record labels publicly, long before creators demanded control of their work, Prince was already fighting that battle. Often alone, often misunderstood, often years ahead of everyone else. At the time, many people dismissed him. They laughed at the symbol, mocked the interviews, questioned the protests, viewed him as difficult, stubborn, impossible. But history has a way of changing perspectives, because years later, the very conversations Prince had been trying to start became impossible to ignore. Artists began asking who owned their masters. Musicians began questioning record contracts. Creators across every industry began fighting for control of their work. And suddenly, Prince no longer looked eccentric. He looked prophetic. The industry eventually caught up to the questions he had been asking for decades. Questions about ownership. Questions about freedom. Questions about power. Today, artists from every genre continue fighting battles Prince helped bring into the spotlight. Whether discussing streaming rights, publishing ownership, creative control, or intellectual property, his fingerprints remain everywhere. Even artists who never met him are benefiting from battles he fought long before they arrived. And yet, reducing Prince's legacy to business victories would miss the larger story. Because ownership was never simply about contracts. It was about identity. Prince understood something many people spend their entire lives learning. The world is constantly trying to define you, tell you who you should be, tell you how to act, tell you what version of yourself is acceptable. Prince rejected all of it. He refused categories, refused expectations, refused limitations, refused permission. And whether people loved him or misunderstood him, he never stopped being himself. That's what made him extraordinary. Not perfection, not fame, not even genius. Freedom, genuine freedom, the courage to remain yourself when the entire world wants something different. And maybe that's why Prince still fascinates people today. Because in a world built on conformity, He was impossible to control, impossible to predict, impossible to own. The music remains timeless. The performances remain legendary. The mystery remains intact. But perhaps Prince's greatest creation wasn't an album. It wasn't a song. It wasn't even Paisley Park. It was the example he left behind. A blueprint for every creator who has ever wanted to protect their voice, their work, their identity, their freedom. Prince spent his entire life fighting to own himself, and against impossible odds, he succeeded. The world remembers the purple suits, the guitar solos, the symbol, the legend. But behind all of it was a man chasing something far more valuable than fame, the right to decide who he was. And maybe that's why Prince still matters. Not because he became a legend, but because he refused to belong to anyone except himself. Prince didn't just change music. He changed the meaning of freedom. And that legacy will outlive us all. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more cinematic stories exploring the lives, struggles, triumphs, and legacies of the world's most fascinating icons. Thank you for watching.